I'm Maeve Conran. I'm with Free Speech TV. And today, as part of our series, Democracy on the Brink, we have a very special guest joining us from Georgia to talk about what has been an historic movement in that state. Joining us today, we have Aunna Dennis, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia. Hello, Aunna. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm Aunna Dennis. I'm the executive director from Common Cause Georgia. So I'm very happy to talk to you, Maeve, and your viewership.
Well, Aunna, there are so many superlatives being used around what's happening in Georgia. Historic, landmark, unprecedented. The reality is, with the numbers, 7.6 million voters were registered in that state, a number never before seen. But of course, this didn't just happen now. This has been something that's been going on for years and years, and it's thanks to groups like Common Cause Georgia and many, many other groups working tirelessly around the state. Give people a sense of the scope of the activism and the grassroots movement around what we're seeing right now in Georgia.
Yeah, so I always tell people that, it definitely did not happen overnight. So thank you for bringing that up and uplifting that point. For the last couple of decades, there has been a lot of energy around making sure that we can be on the ground, be boots on the ground, registering folks to vote. We register folks to vote in the high mountains to the dirt country roads around Georgia. So this has been a very mass effort of our coalition partners that we work with. And we know that there has been so much energy and enthusiasm around this election so voters can really make sure that their ballot is cast and their votes are heard. And just from the sheer number of folks that we have registered, we have over 7 million folks registered in Georgia. And this past election, over half of those voters, over 70% of those voters, actually cast their ballots by vote by mail or voting in person. So this is a great season for Georgia voters, and it's definitely a very renewal season, and the energy around being really focused into our elections and focused into what's in the down ballot and what's happening to come in the future.
Well, of course, it is an election season, and you're right in the middle of it, really, in Georgia, because there is the Senate runoff elections, 2 seats at play, and that's coming up in January. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but I think it's worth emphasizing, what you just touched on there. It's not just registering people to vote, and I think very often that's where the attention goes, but it's really about creating the level of civic engagement that gets people then to vote, but not just to vote in this every 4 years big election, to really be civically engaged on multiple levels. And I know that's been a big part of your work at Common Cause Georgia.
Yeah, so it's definitely been a big part of our work of creating this 365-day voter. And when we say we want to do that, that's because we want to make sure that folks are engaged in the way they want to enter in the political spectrum when it comes to civic engagement. So that could be folks having house meeting, attending town hall tours that we did across the state around redistricting, engaging folks and knocking on doors to make sure that everyone is tallied and counted in our census that just took place, giving out helpful information and correct information around voting deadlines and precinct locations. Then we've done programs around becoming a poll worker. After the primary, this past June primary, where we had thousands of people who came out and cast their ballot, and actually people who waited in lines for up to 6 to 8 hours. We had some critical conversations with boards of elections of what is it that you need the help that we can do to help you all do your best job, and that we can all work together as a community. And they said, hey, Aunna, we need more poll workers. We need more information in other languages to really meet our population needs. So we recruited hundreds and hundreds of poll workers to be placed at different precincts throughout the state during early voting and election day. We have a very robust voting protection program where we actually monitor precincts and we actually help with different needs of county boards of elections. So we do that also on election day and during early voting. We had over 1,300 folks that were recruited for that program, and over 700 folks who were deployed on the ground, and folks who were also volunteering on our social media and digital platforms to make sure that we can be accessible to voters, to meet them where they are, and then also have a visible presence on the ground to make sure that they know that 866 Our Vote, the election protection hotline, is up and running, and that we're ready to fill their calls and answer all their questions. So we do that as part of our 365-day program. And then we also do a lot of fun things. So we do like kind of like a party at the polls or a pep rally at the polls. We do different fun entertainment activities at polling locations as well, to make sure that we can keep people energized and just activated and ready to go. And we always hope that once they see the energy and the activism and how we really want them to be a part of our election cycles and really being part of the engagement, and not just this Georgia political machine that just rolls through every 4 years. No, like every 2 years, every year we have an election, there's always a place for someone in that spectrum of how they want to encounter the election system.
That's such a good point. I think people just focus on the big elections every 4 years, but of course, what can really impact people's lives are the school board, the state legislature, what's happening at a city council level, voting for the district attorney. Now that you have this type of energized voter base in Georgia, do you really think you're going to see big changes across the state in all of those local issues?
I think that over time we'll definitely see big changes with that. We actually have seen in this past election cycle in our down ballot races, like our DA races, our county sheriff races, that was all on the ballot in November. And in certain areas, we have definitely seen more representation of people of color, and also more representation of women who are now elected to office or who are filling those seats. In the recently, I think it was in March, we had a slaying of a black male who was actually just going out for a jog, Ahmaud Arbery. In that area, the district attorney there, they were outseated by another person. So that's how we see how people are really engaged, to make sure that, hey, we're watching to see what you're doing. And that means that if you're not acting according to what the community needs and wants, we, the voter, the people, we actually put you in office, and so they actually can get people out of office too. So we've seen that actually happen, that people are actually super engaged and lasered in on these down ballot and these local races.
A lot of other states, and particularly activists in other states, are looking to Georgia now, not just for inspiration, but for real tangible ideas about what they can maybe replicate in their own states. I know a big part of the voter registration aspect of this is the automatic voter registration that happens in Georgia. I believe that went into effect in 2016. You essentially
Mhm.
have to opt out, right? If you get your driver's
Yes.
license, you're automatically registered to vote. What are you hearing from either Common Cause organizations in other states or other voting rights groups who are energized by what's happening in Georgia about what some of the issues and the tactics that have been used in your state that maybe could be replicated in other states?
I think one of the biggest tactics that we've seen in Georgia that could be replicated is having the community lead on their issues, not just helicoptering in and processing of, hey, this seems like it's the issue. No, let the community lead, because there's always probably someone there in that community who is the opinion leader and that actually has knowledge about what's happening in their community. And so we take that as our grassroots policies, let the boots on the ground be the march leaders of the groundwork. And so also resourcing and building capacity to local organizations where it is needed. So giving time, giving funds, giving it back to the folks in Georgia. We always tell people, there's, when you're in other states, there are so many other people who are doing the work. Let's work as a coalition to definitely make it happen. So that's one tactic that we've seen. And then focusing on policies. For the past like 5, 6 years, we've definitely been doing a re-energizing of how do we look at our election system in Georgia? Because we knew that, hey, it just was not working in the best way that it could work. And we can do some modernization here that could look different from other places. So looking at places like, Washington and Oregon that are all vote by mail states, we looked at different locations like Rhode Island that does risk limiting audits on their ballots. We looked at other places that already had automatic voter registration through the DMV. And so we looked at different ways where we can help modernize our elections to make sure that we can have an equitable and accessible balloting process that's easier for Georgians. Because I can tell you, back in the 50s and 60s, we were counting bubbles in a lye bar of soap. And anybody know anything about bars of soap? There are no bubbles in there. We were counting beans in a jelly bean jar, different things like that. And then we were answering questions of how high is high. So that's how we've had to come into this system of trying to be able to have equitable access to the ballots. We know that with our voting machine technology that our machines were very old. They were 20 years old because these are machines that we got after the 2000 election with the Help America Votes Act. So there's a lot of needed to do to modernize elections here in Georgia. And I do think a big key of that was looking at other states and what they have done and really gaining best practice, and also right now just sharing best practices of what we're actually still learning from our recent 2016, 2018, and 2020 election, which is definitely still going on. So we're still learning lessons through this process as well.
You mentioned a risk limiting audit, and I believe
Mhm.
that was instigated in Georgia as a result of state legislation last year.
Yes.
Is that happening today as we're talking
Yes,
on
yes,
Wednesday? What exactly
yes.
is it for people who aren't familiar? Because this is a big part of election and voter integrity to have this.
Yes, yes. So in Georgia, we use a certain type of voting machine, and we do not have a paper trail of how votes are really tallied in Georgia. So with our machines, we want to make sure that we could have a integrity check on what's happening with our machines and in how votes are being tallied. So we want to have a risk limiting audit. We saw this happen in Vermont and Rhode Island. They had much success with this, and it really ensures the integrity of our elections and the security of our elections. Because I know folks know that in 2016 there was cybersecurity hacks and different things like that. So you want to make sure the integrity of our voting machines remain, and the integrity of our election remain, and the confidence of our elections remain for Georgians. So with this risk limiting audit, we actually have one that's taking place, and we are hoping by 11:59 p.m. tonight Eastern that it has concluded. But with this risk limiting audit, it's really to ensure that the security and integrity of our elections really remains with our machines. And a little bit about this audit, people ask, so how did this audit become a full hand-blown recount? Well, how this happened was that because the margin in Georgia is a 1.1%, and that triggers a recount, we had to do a hand count of all ballots so we can have a great sample size. Because the margin for our election was so small before the recount happened, the audit happened, we the margin was 14,000. Because that margin was so small, we weren't going to get a really good sample size. So the best thing to do to ensure the integrity of the election is actually to hand count all the ballots. So that kind of triggered a what we can call a recount, but it's technically not a recount because this is actually just the risk limiting audit doing its job and doing its work. But the political party can still request a recount. So we may actually see that happen after tonight.
Well, it does seem that things like that are ever so important, particularly when we see the legal challenges, the many legal challenges being put forward in so many different states. But this has been an incredibly divisive election. And so how can constructive conversations happen now amongst Georgia voters across the ideological divides? Because so much discussion now is like, how do we bridge that divide, and how do we bridge differences and instead actually work together on common values? Is what's happening in Georgia, is that part of the conversation?
I think that is a part of the conversation about how do we talk across the aisle. We're embarking on our Thanksgiving holiday season, and we always have these conversations of, we want people to have the conversations of how do we talk about this at our kitchen table? How do we talk about this at our dinner table, even when it can be a little bit dicey? And I always tell people that I enjoy having these types of conversations to find common values and alignment, because I do believe there's value in the discomfort, and there could be some values that we can find out when we actually just start having those conversations, even though it may be uncomfortable. So I do think Georgia will start taking a look at itself and rethinking of how do we have these conversations with our neighbors? Are we actually talking about these things? And then what are the policies that we can meet on the middle of that really reflect where we think Georgia is going, or reflects actually the will of the people?
And it does seem that the civic engagement that's a major component of the work that Common Cause and the other groups are doing in Georgia, that also seems to be a big part of that, because when you have accurate information and you really understand the election system, like the risk limiting audit you just explained, you can counter that false information that gets put out that I think makes it such a divisive situation that we're in.
Yeah, so I always tell people, if you want to learn more about elections, attend your county boards of election meetings. As we're living in a time of COVID, and it has been very unprecedented in how it's impacted the numbers of Georgians here. But I always tell people that now we have the ability of being able to be in more places than we were before, because we're sheltered in place, we're at home, so a lot of things are virtual, or they're through like the telephone. So I always tell people, find out when that board of election meeting is happening, and have someone, even if it's not yourself, attend it, so you can be the eyes and the ears of what's happening in that meeting. So you can hear about when they're talking about a risk limiting audit, when they're talking about what are the provisions of why someone has voted provisionally. What are they going to do with out of county ballots? Are they going to throw them out? Or are they going to count the contest that remains for, that jurisdiction? So what are they going to do about, are they consolidating precincts? Are they moving precincts that could be in your local area? Are they moving it to a place that may have and do harm to constituents? Are they moving it to a sheriff's office? Are they moving it to the county court's office? So those are things you want to actually know about. And with your election officials, you elect them. The will of the people elect voters, not other entities. So since they are accountable to you. So you should ask them questions about how are they managing certain things, and how are they voting on different things, and how have they actually did a hearing and talked to the community and listened to the community about the community's needs. So I always tell people there is ways to be engaged, and there's ways to put pressure where it is needed, to make sure that we all know what's happening in our different processes of elections in Georgia.
Well, of course, in January now there are two elections happening. Well, one election, but two Senate seats in play, and this is the runoff election. Take us through exactly what will happen. Will that be different from the general election in terms of the ballots that people will receive in the mail? Do they need to request them? Is there a whole operation now around voter education for this special election that's coming up in January?
Yeah, so we are headed to special election to our two Senate runoffs, because the contenders did not receive percent of the votes in Georgia. And in Georgia, it's if you don't receive over 50%, you will have to go into a runoff. There was one election that we call a jungle primary or jungle election, where you had so many people that were in the election that we always knew that we were going to have one Senate race that was going to go to runoff in January. But now we have two. So we are doing a lot of voter education to folks on this is when the last day that you can register to vote, which is December 7th. This is when early voting begins, which is December 14th. You need to request your vote by mail ballot by this time, because we're also bumping up against the holiday season, and we don't really know how the mail is going to run. So we always tell people request early, do it through the balloting tracking site, the portal that the Secretary of State's office has created, so you can actually see the lifeline of your ballot, of when your request has been received, when has your ballot been mailed to you, when has it received back to the elections office when you return it in, and when your ballot has been counted. So you want to know all those things. If you are potentially a provisional voter, you want to know why you may be flagged as a provisional voter. So you want to be able to go cure your ballot, different things like that. So we're doing a heavy voter education plan and programming to make sure people have it actually a plan of they're going to go vote, if they're going to go do it in person, if they're going to do it by vote by mail absentee, to make sure that we're all ready to go back out to vote for our Senate contest. Because I always tell people that election day definitely did not stop on November 3rd, as the world can see. It didn't stop on November 3rd. It's definitely continuing through January 5th, and it will definitely continue through. We can make sure that all ballots have a fair, equitable count and that are certified by January 8th. So we'll be definitely still on the ground, making sure that we can cure provisional ballots, talk to voters who voted by absentee, talk to voters who potentially would be flagged as provisional voters, to make sure that every vote can count.
And is there anything that happened in the general election or the run up to that that's making you extra vigilant around certain districts or certain aspects of the upcoming election?
Yeah, so with certain districts, in my own district Senate, Congress District 39, we have a Congress race for the late Congressman John Lewis, District 5. We have that race that's still taking place on December 1st. I'm going to go early vote tomorrow with my daughter by 5 p.m. so I can get that out the way. We also have a Public Service Commission. I always tell people, if you care about public air, energy, different things like that, you want to focus in on that race, because the quality of how you breathe in Georgia really depends on who's elected to that office. And so that race has actually have been moved to the January 5th race. So we're very vigilant, since there has been voter confusion on when actually do these races take place and who is it impacting and the different times and things like that. So we're making sure we're trying to get the correct information out to the voters.
Well, Aunna Dennis, who is the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia, has been our guest today for Democracy on the Brink, part of Free Speech TV. And all eyes still on Georgia, still a lot to get through before we get past this election season. And we know how busy you are. So thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today, Aunna. Special series by Free Speech TV. Thank you so much. I'm Maeve Conran.